Now, I want to get smarter with the help of our leadoff panel, and you're in luck because the one and only Ali Vitale is here. MS Now senior Capitol Hill correspondent and, of course, host of Way Too Early. Peter Baker joins us, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Dave Weigel, political reporter for Semaphore. Mr. Baker, your first visit to Money, Power, Politics. We're thrilled to have you. So let's start with The Economist. The Economist called this deal all carrot and no stick for Iran. Does this document achieve any of the president's stated goals?
Well, first of all, good morning to you, Steph. It's great to see you with the sun out. I'm glad to be here with you. Congratulations on the new show. No, I mean, basically, Iran gets a lot of what it wants, and we don't get anything, as far as I can tell, that we didn't have before the war started, right? Before the war started, the Strait of Hormuz was open. That's now something they're putting into this 60-day deal. And they are reaffirming, and you should always know when somebody puts the word reaffirm in a document, it's not new. Iran is reaffirming that it doesn't want a nuclear weapon, which also was its position before the war started. Now, nobody believed that. Everybody believed that Iran was lying, and there's no reason to believe any different today. So those are the only two things the United States gets out of it. Instead, Iran gets immediate sanctions relief. It gets the promise of all sanctions being lifted, including on ballistic missiles and its support for terrorism, something that never happened in the 2015 Obama deal. And it gets this $300 billion reparations fund, in effect. In this case, the United States, while not paying for itself, according to Trump, will help organize a massive infusion of money to Iran, which is still being run by the same repressive regime, even if different faces, which can then use the money for all kinds of different purposes, including, by the way, funding proxy terrorist groups.
Peter, the president said none of that $300 billion is going to come, as you said, from the American people. Is there a reason we should believe that? He has said that about a whole lot of things, most recently the ballroom, and we know that's not the case. And this is a lot more money, and it's not just going to chandeliers and hardwood floors. It's going to Iran.
Yeah, I think we should obviously take everything with a grain of salt, because these things have a way of changing, right? Things that were stated very clearly at one point, like he would never accept anything other than unconditional surrender, changes a few weeks later. We obviously are accepting something quite short of unconditional surrender, except some Republicans think it's the other way around, that we're the ones who are doing the surrendering. So no, I wouldn't take that as a locked in provision of this. I'm not sure either. If I were Iran, I would necessarily count on there ever being $300 billion either. We're still waiting for Gaza to be turned into the Riviera of the Middle East, which obviously hasn't happened. But even the idea that the United States would promise to organize such a thing, I think is pretty extraordinary and something that a lot of conservatives are focused on.
Ali, what are you hearing from your sources on the Hill? Right before we came on air, I spoke to one Republican operative, and his response to this deal was, what was the effing point of this war?
I think that is a question that's being asked on Capitol Hill as well, especially given the fact that what this deal does is effectively have everyone agree that there are big problems to be solved, and also that they want to solve them in the next 60 days, not right now. Would that it were the case that all of us could just kick our problems down the road. And I think that's what Capitol Hill is waiting to see. Republicans do not like the broad contours of what they've found here. But I also think that as Congress waits to vote on whatever version of this actually becomes final, and I think that's going to be the question over the course of the next 60 days, is there anything tangibly done on the nuclear issue, for example, that Republicans don't feel that they are being walked into a deal that effectively makes them hypocrites on the last decade of talking points that they have had around Iran? That $300 million potential reparations package, that is not sitting well. The idea that they are not dealing with...
They don't like the word reparations, let's be clear.
Certainly that. But also then when you add Iran next to that word, it becomes a whole different tinderbox. And I think that's what we're seeing on the Hill. And yet, the question is, does it go beyond people like Bill Cassidy saying Reagan is rolling over in his grave and calling this, in Cassidy's words, the worst foreign policy blunder in decades? Is there a vote attached to that, an action item attached to that, that is not just from Cassidy, but from other Republicans that have deep concern? And frankly, for people like Senator Lindsey Graham, who have been clear-eyed in consistent fashion around Iran and the ways that he hopes the U.S. would handle it, if Trump walks them into something that has so many shades of the Obama-era deal that they all hated, that Trump pulled out of, and that now very much seems like what's on the table again, is it enough to have loyalty to Trump and hold your nose and vote for it and look like a hypocrite for the last 10 years? Or do you stand up and do you change it from a tangible, actionable perspective? And we haven't seen the Senate do that yet.
Dave, you are closely covering the midterms right now. How are candidates talking about this war? And how will this new development, what these candidates are saying to voters?
most candidates, most Republican candidates, were taking their cue from the president. So at the start of the war, they were very optimistic about a complete victory, turning Persia into a secular state. In the last few weeks, they were talking about affordability and how it would be good for this thing to end so that the price of oil would go down so they'd have better issues to run on in November. That, Ali was just saying it, that's not where a lot of Republicans are. There are a lot of Republican interest that's commingled with the interest of Israel's government and Benjamin Netanyahu in changing what Iran is and turning it into a secular partner in the Middle East. With that not happening, there is a sense, this is outside the campaign trail, there is a sense that they've undermined Israel. And what did Israel get out of this? 12 years of campaigning against Democrats and Obama's nuclear deal. They now have one American party that's pretty critical of Israel and unsympathetic to it. One party that is not that was willing to go to war in Iran, but is not going to do what Israel's government wants. So on the campaign trail, Republicans want to move on. Democrats also very confident from the first moments of the war, very confident opposing it, very comfortable saying it was not going to work. So they are folding this into their arguments that Trump is not over his head so much, but distracted by his search for greatness, his search for some sort of foreign policy legacy and a Nobel Peace Prize. It folds right into their arguments that he is looking at his legacy and the gold image of himself in the mirror instead of your needs, instead of your pocketbook.
Funnily enough, most Republicans that I speak to privately were saying the same thing about the war that Democrats were since it began. They just weren't saying it in public. Okay, since the war started, here's the thing. We have heard the president go back and forth on a whole lot of issues, including on who should get credit or blame. And I want you to watch this piece.
I do not make this statement lightly. The Iranian regime seeks to kill, based on what Steve and Jared and Pete and others were telling me, Marco, so involved, that I thought that they were going to attack us.
Pete, I think you were the first one to speak up, and you said, let's do it. They come to the table, they're begging to make a deal, because they're begging to make a deal.
He's working on the deal, right? You see it happening? So if it doesn't happen, I'm blaming J.D. Vance. If it does happen, I'm taking full credit.
It's very important, but it might not be the kind of a document that I should be signing. If it works out, I'm going to take the credit. If it doesn't work out, I'm blaming J.D. You better be careful, J.D.
Peter, let's talk about Iranian Americans or Iranians there right now. Early days in the war, they were optimistic. They thought Donald Trump was serious about regime change. Isn't this a huge setback for them? And then you got to think about the Israelis who said Trump is finally the guy standing with us. They can't be happy either.
No, I think that's exactly right. Remember at the beginning, he said that help is on the way because Iran was killing its own protesters in the streets. Tens of thousands, by some estimates, of unarmed protesters were killed by the Iranian regime earlier in the year before this war began. President Trump said sympathetically, help is on the way. Well, they didn't get any help because, in fact, the same regime is still in charge. New faces, but the same regime, and in fact, just as repressive as ever. In fact, it's going to be an empowered repressive regime because they'll have $300 billion theoretically in reparation money, plus tens of billions of dollars from sanctions relief and so forth. They'll have more power than ever before. So if you're somebody who hoped this war would change the lives for the better of the people around, that's certainly not something that's happened here.
And Ali, Republicans on the Hill, those who are critical, who are they attacking? They're certainly not going to attack Donald Trump, but like in threading this needle, they could stab themselves in the eye.
And I think you're watching it in real time.
But like, there's no one else to blame.
And yet we are hearing something that Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, does semi-frequently, which is, I disagree with whatever the action is, and the advisors telling the president to do that are steering him in the wrong direction. And that is what we're hearing from people like Senator Ted Cruz, who was saying that the advisors on this were not putting the president in the best position to get the best deal. And so when you hear the president say, if it goes wrong, I'm going to blame J.D. Vance, okay, there's a lot of implications to that. It's a regular Trump tick that when he likes the way something's going, it's his, and when it's not, it's Biden's economy, it's J.D. Vance's Iran deal. He's passing the blame around. But at the same time, for J.D. Vance, that has 2028 implications. He's going to have to defend a deal that reportedly he was against starting a war to even make in the first place. That's notable. And then I'm also struck by the fact that people like former Vice President Mike Pence, right? He's out there saying that this Iran deal is not a good look. And he's saying, well, if I were the vice president still, I would be telling the president to take this tack. So there are a lot of conservatives who don't like the deal, and they are looking for someone else to blame. Is it J.D. Vance? Is it Marco Rubio, who seems to have stepped back from the latter stages of this negotiation? State was more seemingly focused on Lebanon and Israel as opposed to the broader deal itself. Is it someone like Pete Hegseth, who has been testifying on the Hill about the burgeoning cost of the war? There might be someone, and maybe when we're asking for what the action item is, maybe it's a person and not a policy. I don't know. We just don't know yet.